Hello, and welcome to another edition of Risk Management Live. My name is Andy Whaley, Senior Vice President of Marketing for AG Financial, and I'm with Jerry Sparks today, who is our Senior Vice President and actually the President of AG Financial Insurance Solutions, and also one of the nation's leading experts in risk management. So normally, if you're familiar with our segment, Risk Management Live, you normally see Jerry, and you normally see Dr. Rich Hammer. He's actually gone today, and I'm filling in for him as he has a new grandchild and he's traveling to be with family. So Rich, we just want to say congratulations to you. We are very excited for you. We have a very interesting topic to discuss today. We are talking about sexual abuse, but it's in a new light. There's actually, for the first time ever in our country, a church administrator was actually sentenced to jail time even though that individual did not commit the sexual abuse. So we're going to be unpacking that topic. Jerry's going to shine some light on that. We would love to answer your questions. We actually have 3 different ways for you to submit your questions to us. You can tweet us at AG Financial. You can also submit your questions in the area for comments and questions on live stream. Or you can email us at riskmgmtlive@agfinancial.org. So you can tweet us, email us, or submit it there on the live stream page. So Jerry, fascinating topic. I know a lot of people have been talking about this, trying to understand the ramification for churches. Do you mind unpacking some of the story and telling us some of the details?
Yeah, what's interesting about this case is that actually this is now a state Supreme Court case. So actually it's a lot farther reaching than it just being a lower state court case. So a state court actually found the Monsignor guilty of endangering the welfare of a child. The state Supreme Court, then it actually went to a Superior Court. The Superior Court reversed that decision, and then it went to a state Supreme Court. And they reinstated the conviction, and this is of Monsignor William Lynn, on a single charge of endangering the welfare of a child. Lynn was a former secretary of clergy for the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. And he became the first Catholic administrator in the country to go to jail for failing to adequately supervise a sexually abusive priest. So he was sentenced on July 24th by Judge Teresa Sarmens to a prison term of 3 to 6 years.
Now, if you don't mind me interrupting, did this actually start at the state Supreme Court? Is that where it started, or did it start in a lower court?
It started at a lower court, went to a Superior Court, and then ended up in the state Supreme Court.
Okay.
So what the Supreme Court actually came out and said was, this was written by Justice Max Baer, noted that in 1994, 2 years after he became secretary for the clergy, Monsignor Lynn completed a list of 35 archdiocese priests, then in active ministry, with previous complaints of sexual abuse. The first priest on the list was this priest that he is getting convicted of for not watching over or supervising.
Okay. Sure.
But he became, and this person was an alcoholic, and he actually abused a child 3 times. Under Lynn's supervision, the Supreme Court wrote, Avery was transferred to a parish with a grade school and did not say anything about his previous experience. So what we have here is the Superior Court's reversal was based on the wording of the state's criminal 1972 child endangerment law, where it says a parent, guardian, or other person supervising the welfare of a child under 18 years of age commits an offense if he knowingly endangers the welfare of a child by violating a duty of care, protection, of support. So the Superior Court said he wasn't supervising the child. The Supreme Court came back and said, focusing on the supervision element, the statute is plain and unambiguous that it is not the child that Lynn must have been supervising, but the child's welfare. And including that of Billy Doe, identified in the Supreme Court opinion with his initials. By requiring supervision of the child's welfare rather than the child, the statute endeavors to safeguard emotional, psychological, and physical well-being of children. The state Supreme Court opinion simply put, Lynn did not safeguard the physical and moral welfare of the child by placing Reverend Avery, a known sex molester, in a position to molest him. So the Monsignor knew that this priest was an issue. He had 3 previous complaints. He had had it actually in writing. What ended up happening is he placed him someplace else, not saying a word. As a matter of fact, it said, Lynn also did not warn the parishioners at St. Joseph's about Reverend Avery's and informed him, or the former parishioners, that the departure was for health reasons. So all they said was, he's leaving where he's at for health reasons, not for the real reason, and did not tell where he was going to the new church and the new parish about the issues that were involved in his life.
So it was covered up.
It was basically, it looks like a cover-up.
Interesting.
And I think that's the reason why the state Supreme Court came back so hard on this, is that, you know, if you have, you know, Avery went to prison anyway, but you had the chance to protect these children. You swept it under the rug,
right,
or basically did not deal with the issue, and so now you're going to pay jail time. So that's kind of what's happening. It says Lynn was the point man in the archdiocese regarding the sexual abuse of the clergy. His job was to protect the welfare of children, the state Supreme Court said, and instead he transferred Avery and did not tell the priest's new supervisor about Avery's prior abuse, and he took no action to ensure that the abusive priest was kept away from children in his new assignment. So that's where they really came down hard on him. It actually says Lynn suppressed complaints and concerns by the colleagues of abusive priest, and when contacted by law enforcement in cases involving abusive priests, Lynn misrepresented facts to thwart their investigation of these priests and their crimes. Wow. So one of the big things that is a takeaway from that is that, you know, if you are on a board, or if you're a pastor, or if you're a district leader, and you have a person that has endangered the welfare of a child. So it's
Sure.
not actually, you know, it's called it basically, they didn't get him on sexual abuse, but it's endangering the welfare of a child. And you let that person go someplace else, and you don't notify that parish, okay? What I suggest is, if you have somebody that this happens to, whether you're a district leader, a superintendent, conference leader, a monsignor at a diocese, or a senior pastor, and this happens with one of your youth pastors, and you're going to let this person go someplace else, first of all, I would actually have the person that was convicted, that actually had committed a crime,
right,
basically give you the authority to release all that information. Okay, so you're going to have him sign basically a confession and giving permission. Then actually you notify a church or anybody else that contacts you in regards to this situation to make sure that you're on record of notifying that church that there was a previous
Sure.
incident. I have known, actually, I've had it happen where, you know, with all the claims that come in for the Assemblies of God, which I help assist with, we had a district superintendent where a district got sued because they had a priest that a church elected to go ahead and have that has questionable background. When he interviewed to go to this church, the district superintendent went to that church and let them know everything that was in this guy's background.
Good.
And the church still elected him as a pastor. And then something ended up happening. They sued the district, but because of the actions of the priest, basically of the superintendent,
right,
the district was thrown out of court and said they did what is proper. He notified the church.
So then just the church was liable at that point?
And the church was held liable, yeah.
Okay.
But the district was actually thrown out of the lawsuit because he did what a prudent person would do.
Good. Now, so this was interesting, and I was actually going to ask you, even retroactively, if someone is watching this, and this has already happened where they are a church leader, and maybe they did have knowledge of someone who, as what we're talking about, whether it's sexual abuse or endangering the welfare of a child, did go to another church or perform some kind of a role as a minister, if you will. If they had not stepped up to let that church know previously, can they still, even though it happened in the past, go back and say, hey, you need to know this?
You know, it's funny that you should say that, because actually we did have this happen just a couple weeks ago, where an attorney wrote us a letter about a person that committed an abuse close to 30 years ago. And this person was actually still, this person was, he found that this guy was pastoring in another church. And he found out that information and put us on notice that this person abused a person 30 years ago. He understands that it's, in the state that he was at, there was a statute of limitations. But he goes, I'm putting you on notice that this person is serving. The district that was taking care of this situation interviewed this pastor. This pastor did not admit to it, but did not admit against it. And even though he had been serving in that district with flawless records for 30 years, the district went ahead and let him go. Big, you know, a district leader, I was just really impressed with the district leader. It's unfortunate, but from a liability standpoint, once you know the situation, if anything happens, and you did not deal with that situation, the district, general council, the diocese, is going to be held responsible because they didn't deal with the situation. And we're seeing that more and more.
Okay. So we've talked about pastors, we've talked about other church leaders, so whether it's a district superintendent or another leader like in a diocese or another religious group, of course. What about a board of a church? So I guess I'm thinking about, you know, a church that I go to, for instance, and our church board. Is it just if something happens in the church, is it just the pastor that's liable, or could the board actually be liable as well?
You know, it's a great question. The way that the law, and again, this is going to probably vary on a state-by-state basis, but the way that the law is written in Pennsylvania, if they have the welfare of the children and the supervision of the welfare of the children in hand, the board actually, if the board knows of an incident, so if the board basically knew of a person that had committed had 3 sexual abuse cases against them previously, and they did nothing to prevent that, I think the board could be held liable.
Okay, so then that's interesting. So if the board is held liable, does DNO insurance or district and officers insurance cover that type of a situation?
Very good question. Directors and officers insurance actually does protect the board from instances that they do while acting on behalf of that nonprofit. But criminal action is not included. So civil action could be included, but criminal action. So if they go after that board and say, all right, we're going after this board and you all swept this under the rug. Right. If it's in the state of Pennsylvania, I think that all of those people could actually end up serving jail time based on the Supreme Court ruling. So,
and then I think you touched on it, but if you could help me delineate between civil and criminal, what, generally speaking, what makes it criminal?
Because actually there's jail time. So criminal means that a civil action is brought by a person that is saying, you injured me. Okay. A criminal is where the state comes in and says, you injured people and we're coming in and you broke the law. Okay. And so criminal action is normally excluded under a director's and officer's liability coverage. So if there was criminal action involved and they willingly did this, there might not be coverage under that D&O policy for this criminal action. Okay. I do have one more question, but before I get to that, I do want to remind everybody that there are 3 ways to submit your questions. So if you're watching this right now live, then the ways are tweeting us at AG Financial,
submitting your questions on the live stream page or emailing us at riskmanagementlive@agfinancial.org, and that's riskmgmtlive@agfinancial.org. Jerry, this is great information. At the end of the day, what does a church need to do to protect their children?
That's a great question, and this is one thing that we really try to emphasize to all our churches. In my opinion, the most important thing and the number one reason why churches end up in court is because of sexual abuse. So the first thing that they need to do is they need to run a background check. The background check needs to be a criminal records check and look at the registered sex offender registry. So it needs to do those two things. So they need to do that on anybody that has a key to the building and anybody that actually works with children or is even around children that much. Second is that they should do a reference check. And the reference check could be with checking with I would suggest getting 2 reference checks. And that is going to actually be with people that know how they work with children. And you want to document that so if something does come about, that you have checked references. Third is don't let one adult be alone with one child.
Right.
So you can have one adult teaching a Sunday school, but you have to have a lot of children. You could have somebody else coming in to take them to the restroom and that sort of thing, but you do not allow a child to be left alone with one adult. And third or fourth is actually have a 6-month waiting rule. So let people be in the church for 6 months before you actually let them operate with working with children.
Okay, that's interesting. That actually has to do with a question that we just got from a viewer. Someone is asking, they are part of a church that is small, and it looks like they have just a smaller amount of volunteers, and the volunteers that are there at the church have been there for quite a long time. Mm-hmm. They did not do, it looks like they did not do an extensive background check because they knew the people in the church. Right. Should they go back and actually do some kind of a background check?
Excellent question, and we get this question all the time. Once you implement a program, you want to stick with your program. So I would actually suggest that they do go ahead and do background checks on all their volunteers and do reference checks on all their volunteers. And and do it as of June 1st or whatever date that you pick out. Go ahead and run those. I know that with a lot of small churches, we belonged to a small church before going to a very large church. And I mean, my wife was a church secretary. I was actually a subdeacon in the church. Mm-hmm. And my wife and I taught the Sunday school class, which there was one Sunday school class.
Sure.
And telling them that, we were at that church. My wife actually was born into that church. You need to do background checks on us. I mean, well, gosh, Jerry, we've known Carolyn and her family forever and ever. That just seems like a waste of money. I would tell you to go ahead and do it. People look for places to serve, especially in churches, that they can have a chance to get alone with a child. Pedophiles look for that sort of thing. So I would actually implement a program and actually tell you to go ahead and start, effective this date, we're going to implement this. And even though you belong to a small church and you've known Grandma Susie for 50 years, I would go ahead. I mean, here we had a pastor at that church that I was telling you about that had served 30 years at that church, but there was a previous incident that happened, and it was found out 30 years later. And this person, if he could have got away with the statute of limitations, if he was in a different state, he would actually be suing. But he actually put out a letter to all the new parishioners in that church to see if there was anybody else that had any instances, because he's going after that pastor.
Interesting.
So I would still do a background check.
Good. So any final thoughts? That's it for the questions we have. Of course, if anyone's watching and wants to submit that, now's the time. But any other final thoughts? If you were to sum this whole thing up, the idea, what churches need to know for ministers or pastors watching this right now, at the end of the day, what's the one thing that they need to be understanding and considering with this?
I think, number one, they need to do the background check. They need to do the reference checks. They need to implement where no child is left alone with an adult. But what you really need to do, what you really need to think about once you become aware of an incident,
Right.
what you do with that incident really makes a difference. And I would actually suggest, number one, getting a signed confession. Number two, in that signed confession, they give permission for you to release information. If you have a person go from one district to another district or from one diocese to another diocese, you need to inform that leader where they're going in of what's happened. Or if you're going to another church, you need to, and that church comes back for a background check, you need to let them know what has happened, because I will guarantee if something happens again, you're going to be named in the lawsuit.
Yeah.
And what you did to protect that church, okay, is going to be what is looked at. So always look at it this way. What would a prudent person do? Because when you're looking at women and men on a jury, and I'm going to say mainly women on a jury, they're going to say, what did you do to protect my child? If you allowed this to happen,
Sure.
If there's any way that there's a chance that I can make you guilty, because somebody's got to pay for this, I'm going to go after you.
Right.
And so you got to be really prudent in how you handle that.
Very good. Thanks for watching today. This has been a very interesting session. As always, you can watch this video and many more videos on similar risk management topics for churches at our AG Financial YouTube page. So for now, thanks for joining. We'll see you next month.